Good evening and welcome to the 30th meeting of the Milton Planning Board for fiscal 2022. I'd like to introduce myself, Meredith Hall, Chairman of the Planning Board, and the rest of the board members. If they could introduce ourselves and the staff as well. Rich?
Rich Beeler, member.
Maggie?
Maggie Oldfield, member.
Cheryl?
Cheryl Tagayas, member.
Sean?
Sean Fahey, member.
Tim?
Tim Zerwinski, Director of Planning and Community Development.
Julia?
Julia Getman, clerk.
And Josh?
Josh isn't with us tonight. He's actually in sunny California. He's got a wedding that he's attending this weekend.
Good for him. Good. So if we can go ahead, we're going to jump ahead just with a couple of things. If we could start with the approval of the minutes from April 14th and April 28th. Have members been able to look over those minutes?
I did, Meredith, I sent late this afternoon to Julia and to you edited versions. I think there's enough edits that it warrants people taking a look at them.
Okay.
The 14th,
yeah.
Sorry, the 14th would be just you, Rich, and I, right? So,
right.
And then the 28th would be all of us.
Did you have edits to both?
Edits to both, yes. So if we could defer that to the next meeting so everyone has a chance to review my edits.
Yes.
I think that would be good.
That's great. All right, so I moved, it will do the minutes of the following meeting. So next, staff update, but Tim might be occupied.
Yeah, so you all should have in your inbox an email inviting you to a Google Meet that we can hop into for executive session. Meredith, you should have a prompt from Town Council about entering executive session.
Yes, exactly. Yes. As the chair, with that, I would move pursuant to general law, chapter 30A, section 21A1, sometimes called purpose 1, that the planning board enter executive session to discuss a complaint brought against a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual, specifically an open meeting law complaint made by Nathan Hutto against the planning board and the planning board's response to the complaint. The planning board will return to open session at the conclusion of executive session.
So just for everyone in the viewing public's information, the way that we're going to, typically if we were in person, we'd ask you all to leave the room, or we do this at the end of the meeting after everyone was gone. But executive session means that the board is going to be in a conversation with town council without public participation. So the way that we're going to do it here is everyone on the board, myself and Julia, are going to mute and turn off our cameras. We're going to move into a separate video chat that has not been publicly posted, so it'll just be the planning board, town council, Julia, and myself. At the conclusion of the executive session, we will return to the Zoom. I don't think this is going to be a super long affair, 15, 20 minutes. We should be back, at which point we'll pick up with the rest of the agenda, including the scenic road public hearing. So just so everyone knows what to expect, and that's what you're going to be seeing a blank screen for the next 15 or 20 minutes. So if everyone on the board could mute and turn off the camera on the Zoom and enter the Google
Good evening, and we're ready to continue the evening. Next on the agenda, just wanted to highlight our next meeting dates, which are May 26th. And we were scheduled to be June 9th, but now town meeting has been moved to June 9th. So we just have to select a new date for that meeting. I don't know if June 8th, the day before, is a possibility for folks, but
What was that date?
June 8th instead of the 9th.
Meredith, is that still in a Zoom session or is that in person?
It's Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's up to you all,
Well, I
Yeah.
shouldn't say that. That's true.
but it'll be sandwiched between two remote town meetings. So
Yeah.
you can make it out of what you will.
What's the agenda for that meeting?
What is
I don't know.
on that current agenda? Well,
Yeah.
we may be moving Dodson Flinker. We may have a follow-up.
Oh,
Actually, we now, the way town meeting has fallen, we may be able to do a follow-up to Dodson Flinker on the 26th and do a public hearing on the 8th. I don't know if that's too quick, but that may be, having that public hearing that date may give ample time for comments.
Well, it wouldn't be a public hearing.
No, not on the 26th would be a follow-up
No, but I mean, like anything that we do about the design guidelines wouldn't be a public hearing. It would just be a public something.
meeting on that. Okay.
just to note, Tim, the 26th, I'll be here, but the week of the 6th in June, the week of the 20th, I most likely won't be around at all those days of those weeks.
Sorry, what week was that, Rich?
I'm traveling the week of the 6th in June and the week of the 20th. And it's for work, so it's all day. I mean, I just won't be available on that.
Okay.
And I can miss, if that's all the agenda is, I can miss it, so don't worry.
Maybe we can do some housekeeping things and just some, allow to hear from the public then on the June 9th, on the final, our
Yeah.
draft for Dodson Flinker.
Yeah, because the 8th doesn't work well for me either. And then town meeting is also the 13th, right?
Right. It just seems a little tight to move it earlier, but we really don't have 6. Tim,
what else is on the agenda that you anticipate for that meeting on the 9th?
well, I mean, it's
I'm not seeing anything.
nothing. Yeah, I think we could move it to
Okay.
that following week, but Rich wouldn't be there for that, but it would be better for you, Cheryl.
Well, not really. I'm trying to look and see. Unfortunately,
June gets busy.
June gets busy, yes. And so I guess that if we really would not, it'd be preferable not to have two of us not attend a meeting, right? So, and Rich, you're out the week of the 6th and the week of the 20th.
Yeah, I mean, as it gets closer, like maybe I'll be in like the end of those weeks. I just today, I don't know.
Well, if it's just the guidelines, then what about the 2nd of June?
I'm available the 2nd. Oh wait, yeah, 2nd. Yes, that's a Thursday. Yeah.
That works for me. So should we put that on the calendar just to sort of mark that and everybody can just confirm
Sure.
that
Yeah,
26th?
I'm fine with that too. So we'd meet on the 26th and we'd meet on the 2nd.
Of June. Tim, how does that look for you?
It's if I don't ever have anything booked more than like a week ahead of time. So yeah, totally fine.
Okay. Okay. All right. Those will be our next dates. All right. And moving to staff update then.
I could tell you some stuff. I'm going to try to keep it super quick because there are a couple things on the agenda that we just need to get to. One thing is in addition to the conversation that you're going to have on 131 Elliott tonight, they also have submitted condominium documents that the special permit requires the planning board to sign off on those. I don't know, did I send those around already? So you've at least had a chance to take a look at them. It's not technically on the agenda. I figured folks would want to take a closer look. I don't anticipate there being a decision tonight on that, but maybe if you're ready to do it, then great. You know, what I can also do is send around the portion of the special permit that kind of talks about what you're supposed to be looking for. It's really super basic stuff. You know, they've got to form a condo association, you know, et cetera. But you may want to take a little bit more time to just look through those, and then we can put that on an agenda for the 26th. There's other stuff that we've got cooking. I was kind of ready to talk a little bit more about town meeting, but we can push that off a little bit now. Yeah, so I'm done. Let's keep it moving, I guess.
Okay. All right. Next on the agenda is the reorganization of the board, election to a board secretary. I don't know if there's anyone who's interested. Rich, you've been great, but you don't have to feel like you need to continue.
No, thank you.
Okay. Cheryl, you're very good with the minutes and edits. I don't know if you would be interested.
So to be clear, just so everybody understands, the secretary is responsible for the minutes, right? So that's pretty much it for the responsibility, correct?
Yes.
And fills in for the chair when the chair is not available, correct? Okay.
I'm opening it to anybody. I'm not, if anyone else is interested in taking it on, I'm very open.
I don't need to.
I'd rather not. If I'd rather not take it on, to be honest with you.
All right, so I do look at the minutes. I don't always get to them in a timely manner, but I'll agree to do it if folks would like for me to do that.
I would appreciate it.
Yeah, sounds good.
That'd be great, Cheryl. And we'll all have an extra set of eyes on it too. So it's not just on you if you don't get to it. So, okay, great. So could I have a motion to appoint Cheryl Tagayas as secretary?
Motion to move to, I just lost my words. Have Cheryl Tagayas be secretary for this year.
A second?
Second.
All in favor? Roll call. Maggie?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Cheryl?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay, thank you, Cheryl, for that. And now we have I didn't know if that Sean was actually going to be here tonight. The appointment of planning board rep to replace Kathleen was on the Community Preservation Committee. I don't know that we need to finalize this tonight. We can sort of think about positions that we are interested in doing. I don't necessarily feel like people always have to step into the last person's role. A matter of fact, unless, I don't know if Maggie or Sean, if either of you are interested, we could probably state what committees we currently serve on and that we represent, and just go around and discuss those. And, you know, I can tell you, I've been on the open space and recreation committee, which I actually was thinking Maggie might be interested in that. I'm not, you know, I'm very open to whatever people are interested in doing. But I thought that was a really interesting committee. Tim's been doing some good work on that. I'm also on the capital improvements committee, which for those who, if schedule allows, that's actually a committee. It doesn't meet all year round. It meets, you know, more frequently around the budget season. They tend to meet at 7 a.m. early in the morning because the folks that are on it mostly have jobs that they need to get to. So it is conducive to somebody who would want to not have something to meet in the evening or during the daytime. And that capital improvements committee is really interesting because you see a lot is vetted before it goes into the budgets, and it was very interesting. And if somebody was interested in doing that, I'd be happy to either rotate off or stay on that. I actually was part of the original group who tried to pass the Community Preservation Act. So I'm really interested in that. I know, Maggie, you said you were not as interested in that. So that would be something I would be willing to step into and take that on. But Cheryl, you have your hand up, so please go ahead.
Yes, I think on the agenda tonight is just the CPC. And so I would like to nominate Rich to take that position tonight. And Meredith, I know you just expressed that, but, you know, I think the other, like, I know the Master Plan Implementation Committee, for example, those appointments are in July. So I don't know if the other appointments have a time frame that they're typically had, but, you know, adding those to the to a future agenda, I think, you know, makes sense. So anyway, that's my, you know, if there's a second on my nomination.
Is that something you would like to do, Rich? Because I'd be happy to.
Yeah, definitely. I would.
Great. All right. I would second.
I'd be happy to. Perfect.
All right, so let's do a roll call. Rich?
Yes.
Maggie?
Yes.
Cheryl?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
And myself? Yes. That's great, Rich. Good, thank you. Okay, and next we have citizens speak. Do we have anybody who's interested in speaking this evening about something that's not on the agenda? Does anybody see hands? I don't.
Yes, I see a hand.
If we can move in, I unfortunately can't see who has hands up.
Kathleen O'Donnell's already in the room, so she should be able to speak, I'd imagine.
Great.
I didn't know whether the issue of an amendment to the citizens petition would be something to be talked about in Citizens Speak or later in the agenda. But I just wanted to let you all know that I did file with the moderator an amendment to the citizens petition on the temporary apartment bylaw to remove the requirement for occupancy by a family member. I did not touch anything else on that petition, nothing on the process, nothing on anything other than just to remove the requirement for the family member. For two reasons. One is that I don't think that serves a purpose for zoning. It's still a density, it's still occupancy, it's still a unit that counts on the SHI. So I don't see that there's a zoning purpose behind that limitation. And I also just, as a practical matter, don't think that it makes a lot of sense. People have to go through a huge effort to get those permits from the zoning board. It's going to be a long wait, spend a lot of money. If some family member does unfortunately not last long enough for the occupancy, it seems terrible that you'd have to go out to try and find somebody in Ancestry.com to get move into that apartment. So that's the thing that I wanted to mention. I just didn't know whether this was the appropriate spot.
Thank you, Kathleen. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to that this evening. We'll have time to get to those articles, but I appreciate your sharing that. And if the members have not seen it, we can make sure that that Tim, if we could send that out to the members, Cheryl's friendly amendment, just for future discussion, if they have, so they have time to review it.
I think you mean Kathleen's friendly amendment, but.
Sorry, I mean Kathleen's friendly. Sorry.
I just had a question for Tim, if I may, on this one, Meredith.
Yes, good.
Tim, is the, do you know if the Mass General laws related to zoning where the planning board is responsible to hold a public hearing on any zoning amendment? So the citizens petition was one that we did. If there's a friendly amendment to it, or if there's an amendment to that, are we asked to weigh in on that? Like if it were a planning board article, of course, we would be asked to weigh in, but I don't know what the protocol is or the requirement on a citizens petition. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure either. You know, we hosted the public hearing because there's got to be a public hearing for zoning. When it comes to amendments, you know, Kathleen submitted it ahead of time because that's what you're asked to do. But my knowledge of this is like it's something that gets handled on the floor of town meeting, and there'll be a determination. I guess the thing that's tripping me up is I was CC'd on Kathleen's email to the moderator, but I haven't gotten a request from either the moderator or the warrant committee or anyone else to get any input from the planning board. So, you know, I'll send it around. You all can look at it. If you want to try, you can. I thought that I would by now have gotten a request from someone to hear from the planning board on it. I don't know if they're waiting for town meeting or whatever. But that's kind of when it comes to stuff like this, where it's an amendment that's kind of technically, well, I don't know if it's technically, but you know, a friendly amendment that's not necessarily, you know, something that is submitted for the warrant that goes through the normal public hearing process. I kind of defer to the moderator on how those things get handled. That was a bad answer to a good question, but maybe that's all we've got is bad answers.
So Meredith, can I ask that you as the chair reach out to the moderator and the chair of the warrant committee and let them know that the planning board, well, first of all, maybe we should get a consensus, but I would suggest that we do weigh in on it because we were asked to weigh in on the main article. Why wouldn't we weigh in on an amendment when it's submitted in advance? So I would just like, if others agree with that, that you let the moderator and the warrant committee know that that would be our request.
Yes, and both the amendment and just the original, the citizens article as well. I think we should open that up for discussion again. It's a new board, so both issues, both the friendly amendment and the original article as well. So yeah, I think that's
because it's a citizen's petition, do we have to ask the citizens who signed it to accept it?
Yeah, that'll be that's when we eventually get to town meeting, and I have to assume that that's something that's going on. I think either as we speak or it's already happened. That the petitioners have gotten that amendment and are looking at it, and will speak to whether they consider it to be a friendly amendment or not. Kathleen, I think, raised her hand again. I don't know if you want to recognize her. She might have some insight into the process here.
Sure, Kathleen, you're welcome to speak.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I would be asking at town meeting when the amendment is presented, the moderator would ask me to come forward with my amendment, and I would request at that time that it be treated as a friendly amendment. But you know, they can say yes or no, but that's I would hope that it would be. And then the moderator would ask the warrant committee to weigh in on it as well. And presumably we'll be asking the planning board, as since it's a zoning article, what your position is on it as well.
But one thing I would ask is that because the warrant committee, we're voting on the recommendation of the warrant committee. So at that point, it becomes the recommendation. Just like when we've done zoning articles and we've changed them after they've gone to print, it then has to get changed in the recommendation. So I believe it's the warrant committee that would have to agree to it, to answer Maggie's question. And then the warrant committee would ask the petitioners if they would support it. That would be in my experience at town meeting, I think that's how it would go.
That sounds right.
All right, thank you, Kathleen. That's okay. Are there any others for citizens speak? Any other hands? Okay, if no one is seeing any other hands, I think we can go ahead and open our scenic road application hearing for 693 Canton Avenue. If we can let in the applicants.
Hi, Kristen. Do you have anyone else with you, or is it just you tonight?
She muted.
Hi, it's just me.
Okay.
Hi, Kristen, welcome.
Thank you.
So Kristen, I'll just give a quick intro, and then you can kind of talk through your project. I have the materials that you submitted. I can share my screen and kind of show those as you walk through. It's pretty straightforward. So just to sort of introduce the new board members, Section 13 of the Planning Board Rules and Regulations govern scenic road permits in the town of Milton. We have a number of designated scenic roads that are designated under, and I don't have the statute at the tip of my fingers, but there's a state law that allows you to designate scenic roads. And it has to do with the scenic nature that's provided by trees and stone walls in the public right of way. You know them when you see them: Canton Ave, Brush Hill Road. There's a bunch of other ones in Milton. And what the scenic road regulations are meant to do is gives the planning board jurisdiction over the destruction of stone walls, the taking down of trees in the public right of way. Planning board gets to evaluate these types of projects, propose reasonable conditions to preserve the scenic nature of the scenic road, and evaluate any kind of mitigation that is required if there are trees that are taken down as a result of the project. This one is a typical one in the sense that a lot of times we get a scenic road application because a homeowner wants to add a new driveway opening. And oftentimes the new driveway opening has a stone wall in the way. And so we're here at the planning board to kind of discuss that. So I will pass it off to Kristen. She can introduce herself and talk through a bit of what she's proposing to do down at 693 Canton Ave.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am Kristen. I am actually born and raised on Canton Ave. I don't live in the same house that I grew up in, but I am just down the road. I have no intention of making Canton Ave any less scenic with this project. It's just, as you can imagine, pretty hard to pull out onto the street at times. So we are hoping to add a second driveway opening and basically add a little U driveway, pretty small, but it would require moving a portion of the existing stone wall. And we actually want to put it in a spot where a part of the stone wall is currently missing. So I have 170 feet of frontage right now. Right now, if you look at the drawing that Tim has just put up, to the right of my driveway, up at the top there's about 30 feet of stone wall that's in good condition. Directly in front of my house, there's about 35 feet of stone wall that is missing entirely. And then to the left of my house, there is about 80 to 85 feet of stone wall that is completely fallen over It's barely at the same level as the sidewalk right now. It doesn't even look like a stone wall. So I am hoping to just kind of displace those stones and while we build the driveway and then eventually then use those stones to make an actual stone wall so that it looks like the rest of Canton Ave. Because right now it just looks like a pile of old boulders. And I have included photos, current day, and I actually have a lot of photos of this property from, I don't even actually know when they date back to. The previous owners left us a lot of historical photos that are definitely hundreds of years old. People are driving around in horse and buggies. And the stone wall used to look nice then. So we hope to make it look like it used to. So that's actually the house in all of these photos. That is our house when it was one of the only houses on Canton Ave. That photo, the last one, is actually right after the bad storm in the 1930s when some trees fell on the house. So yeah, as you can see, the stone wall used to look nice, and we hope to, once we create a driveway opening, make it look like that again. And we don't intend to touch any trees.
Any questions for Kristen? Cheryl?
Did you have a dimension on that plan for the width of the new curb cut and
Yes.
driveway?
Our existing curb cut is 22 feet. I'm hoping to make a second curb cut of the same width, 22 feet. The driveway would not be that width, but that would be the curb cut width.
So
The driveway would be more like,
yeah, 22 feet is really wide for a driveway curb cut.
well, it's just hard to pull out sharply onto Canton Ave, you know, when you're trying to do it on a moment's notice as well. So it's definitely not as that. The driveway would be more like 12 feet. But even now with the 22 feet on the other side, we're still driving over the curb sometimes to try to pull out. You know, people don't let you go. You're looking for an opportunity most of the time.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I'm at 660 Canton Ave, so we're neighbors. We haven't
Yeah,
met, but we're neighbors. So, and so I do know that Canton Ave is tough. But I guess the DPW will work with you on the curb cut width. I just wanted to ask because it's just nice to minimize those. But otherwise, you know, I think what you're proposing, you know, would make sense. Were you also proposing to bring in new stone? You won't have enough to do the length of wall that you're planning to do, is that right?
It's not clear to me now. I feel like we'll need to build up the ground underneath the stones because they're sunken so low at this point. And once we assess how much we have, I don't know if we would need additional. I don't know if that makes a difference to the planning board or not, you know, whether we need to add. We certainly wouldn't be removing any, but I'm open to adding some to make the wall look, like I said, more like a wall, if that's okay with the planning board.
I was just going to add the same comment that Cheryl had. If it's possible, because when I saw the entrance to your current driveway, it's interesting because the curb cut is much wider than your actual driveway.
Correct.
So it looks like the curb cut allows to drive up on the sidewalk, actually, like part of the right side when you're entering your driveway currently. So I think it would actually look a little bit nicer if you could have more stone on the frontage. And even if you went to maybe 18 feet, you know, or allowing for just a slightly less than the current granite curbing, I think would actually be a little bit more attractive, and you wouldn't have to drive up on it wouldn't look like you're driving up on your sidewalk, the sidewalk on Canton Ave. And the other thing that I didn't see any significant trees when I was looking at it. I completely agree that I see the need and that this makes sense, and you have a beautiful historic home, and you know, I think it would look really, really beautiful in front of the property. I was going to offer, if you want, I can put you in touch with somebody who actually is on a big farm up on Upper Canton Avenue and has large old stones. And she has said that anyone who's replacing stone walls would be welcome to come and take from her. She has excess stone on her property. So
That would be amazing. I would love that.
and it's old. It's probably the same, sort of period. And you can get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to connect you with that person too. So
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, just for the board's information, we don't have a survey that shows where the stones and the trees are in relation to the property line. But just from a kind of looking at the plot plans, looking at the parcel map, and kind of eyeballing it, quite frankly, I mean, most of Canton Ave over here, the sidewalk is kind of the property line within a foot or two. And so my best estimate is that the property line at most goes through this stone wall. And so, when you look at the trees that are kind of in the vicinity of the frontage, this kind of tall one at the top is the only one that's really kind of close. And, I would consider that tree to be actually not in the public right of way. That being said, in previous applications, I think when we have kind of close calls like this, we'll want to kind of discuss, and I think one great way is to condition, the width of the driveway to minimize the amount of digging that has to happen. We'll want to do our best to sort of make sure that there's very minimal impact on the root system of that tree. The scenic road regulations are about the removal of trees, and there's no explicit removal of tree in this proposal. But then we get to start to get into sort of the gray areas of, okay, how close are you to the tree, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this one is the only one that's even close. I'm confident that it's probably on the other side of the property line, but we will want to kind of work with the applicant to figure out a configuration, and a width that does its best to keep that one intact.
And currently the stone wall has kind of toppled over onto that tree. I'm hoping by getting the stones off it would actually help the tree, but yeah.
So Mike, one of my
Christine,
questions, sorry, Sean.
Go ahead.
I just, if I could just follow up quickly on the reason I asked about the amount of stone is, I think it would be, in terms of the scenic road and the continuity of wall, it would be beneficial to have as much wall as possible. Like a short little piece of wall, I think would look more out of place than like the wall that's there now. So I guess that's something for us to think about in terms of the condition.
Yeah, right now the wall you're looking at in this photo is about 80 to 85 feet long, if you can even call it a wall, but and like I said, probably about 15 to 20 feet of that would be relocated to a part where there's currently no wall at all. So we'd end up with, a longer stretch that would just be divided into two sections instead of one section.
Kristen, my name is Sean Fahey. Nice to speak with you this evening. I just had a couple of quick questions. How do you currently leave your driveway? Do you back out onto Canton Ave?
We back out sometimes, or we turn around on the grass that abuts our existing driveway. It's difficult.
Yeah, it appears that way. I'm looking at, well, I happen to see what you're doing as an improvement. But a few more questions, if I could.
Sure.
If the wall is reconstructed, probably a wall to try to achieve in terms of what it looks like is your neighbor across the street. Their wall, it's not a high wall, it's a low wall, but I walk Canton Ave, every weekend. So anyhow, just in terms of maybe what your wall could look like, if it was to, and Cheryl, you probably see it more often than I do because you drive out and sometimes probably take a left. So I think do see it as an improvement, but I noticed that your neighbor, I'm looking at Google Earth right now, and your neighbor next to you has a driveway configuration similar to what you're trying to achieve, right?
Correct. Yeah, theirs is a much bigger loop, but yes, yeah.
Yeah, and I do think if yours is tighter, it's better because when I look on a Google Earth image, it looks to me like they have 3 driveway openings. Now, one of them might not be used, but they have 2 that are active, and then there's another one beyond the active one. It looks like there's another opening in the curb.
Yeah, yep,
Am I
that's
correct?
correct. Yeah, I don't know if I don't think they ever use that. It looks kind of defunct, but
I think the DPW might have an interest in closing something along there. You know, when I look at this, they have 3, you would have 2. There'd be 5 openings within 2 properties. It's probably more than what the DPW would like. But anyhow, Tim, that's just a comment. I'm not sure. The images that we have here, of course, only are only with respect to Kristen's property. So, you know, beyond the plan that you have up on the screen, there is an opening that looks like it's not utilized. Kristen, it looks like at one point in time somebody must have used that for a vehicle parking space.
yes, it's just beyond my property line. That is not on my property, but yeah, it looks like it's just for one vehicle.
Right. It may not even, I don't even know if it was a legal opening. It kind of looks a little odd, but I don't know if it is or it isn't. But in terms of the curb cut opening, my experience is, regardless of what dimension anyone might want, the DPW will probably, and Cheryl, you mentioned this, will probably dictate what they'll allow.
Yeah,
So it's my own.
and just for everyone's kind of edification, the way that these things typically go is, you know, the scenic road process is part of a kind of 3-part analysis of a driveway permit. There's a review by the engineering department, I think, Sean, for precisely the reasons that you're bringing up, and I think they'll have, you know, whatever they'll have to say about the proposal as it relates to sight lines and, you know, whether there's any conflict with any infrastructure. And then there'll also be a review by the inspectional services department to make sure we're consistent with the pavement requirements in the front yard setback. So they'll probably at that point, you know, because the planning board's only really concerned with kind of what's going on at the property line, we can work with schematic drawings like this. There'll come a time when Kristen applies for the driveway permit where they'll need a little bit more worked up plans, but that'll come later. But I think you are right. There is a DPW engineering department review of this, and they'll have some commentary about this. They'll work with this.
Hey, Kristen, I do think that when the DPW considers this, they probably, whether they would or wouldn't, they should take a look at the adjacent property, because I do think 5 openings within that distance is not necessarily what we would want, and certainly on what's designated as a scenic roadway. So, you know, closing that one that I think your neighbor probably doesn't use would contribute to an improvement, you know, in addition to what you're doing. So I'm sure, Tim, at some point that's gonna be recognized. And I don't know how complicated that makes things for Kristen, you know. If it does, you know, if the neighbor's property somehow becomes part of the review.
There are many things about this project that sort of caught my attention, and I know some of them aren't really in our jurisdiction, but I kind of look at a project kind of from start to finish and what it could look like. So I understand there's probably a need for a second driveway. In fact, when my daughter was leaving high school, and she was on Canton Ave going down the hill, she got hit from the rear and totaled her car, and it was by a teacher. So I understand how the road can be. But I'm wondering if there are any alternative designs that you explored, and what were the reasons for not really going with those options? Because I also live on a scenic road and I have a long driveway, and I kind of have a backwards L in my driveway, so I can turn around and then pull out. So that was just one of my questions. And also, it is helpful kind of to know where the town's property is. I think a survey would be helpful. It's always nice to know what your property lines are and what's your responsibility and what's the town's responsibility. And I also think it might be helpful if you staked out the driveway entrance so we can kind of see what you're thinking of. I do also agree that I think 22 feet is probably a little excessive. Here at my business, I went out and measured our entrance. So we have trucks going in and out all day long, and we have two 12-foot gates. So our entrance is 24 feet, and that allows for two cars to pass each other. And I also, opened up our truck door and I measured from outside to outside of truck doors, and that's usually about 14 feet. And so usually if you kind of do a driveway, you accommodate for that, and you also accommodate for room for people to step out of their car. So we sort of add on an additional like 18 inches on either side. So if you think 14 feet plus kind of another 3 feet, a 17-foot wide driveway at the most probably kind of would be maximum. And again, back to the construction of the wall, I'd hope that it would sort of be a dry stacked wall, so there's no mortar would be involved. And use the color of New England stones. I think it's great if Meredith knows someone who has stones available, because a lot of stones out there are more in the brown color, and that's not a New England color, like the grays are New England color. So sticking with grays and whites would be good. And just another note, I noticed that the property goes down a little bit. So I'm wondering if you have to bring in some fill to make it level with the sidewalk. And so my concern is if you bring in fill, then it would go up onto the trunks of the trees. So usually you want to have enough space so your trees aren't buried in any soil. So that's sort of my notes.
Can I?
Maggie. Yeah, we have considered other options. We've been living in this house for 2.5 years. So we've talked about a lot of different options on how to improve getting in and out of the driveway. The existing driveway where it sits, there really isn't room to make that a whole lot wider or make an L shape like you mentioned you have at your house. Our property line is much closer to that side of the house. The other side of our property, where we obviously have a little bit more room and where we plan to, put this U shape, that's actually, if we were to put a bigger driveway over there, we're then talking about ruining gardens and displacing a lot of boulders. There's like a beautiful peony garden over there. The previous owners lived here for 47 years and they did a lot of gardening, and I have tried my best to keep it as beautiful as they had it, even though I have zero gardening experience. So, with that said, we're just essentially trying to come up with the options that disrupt the existing ecosystem here as little as possible. And that wall needed to be addressed one way or another, whether we were doing this driveway or not. So that's why we decided that it probably made sense to try to do it all at the same time.
And I think it'd look pretty with the driveway. And the only other comment is just, and again, this doesn't really fall in our jurisdiction, I don't think, but it's always nice to see as little impervious surfaces as possible. So if, you know, doing a stone driveway as opposed to asphalt might look nice. It also will reduce your stormwater runoff fee expensively. So I don't know what your plans were with how to finish it.
We are not really set in stone at this point with what we wanted it to be finished. I think my husband's probably leaning towards asphalt. I'm open to, you know, stone if that turns out to be a better option, like you said, for drainage reasons, because the entire property is sloped in one direction. And so it, you know, like you said, we would have to build up part of the property where the U shape is going to be put. And like you said, that would require some fill. It probably would require some special considerations for drainage to keep the flow of water moving in the direction it currently goes in, without disrupting that with, you know, a whole lot of extra fill. So we probably would need to have a pipe somewhere under that U, just to keep the flow of water moving the way it currently moves.
Rich has his hand up. Sorry, is there to Cheryl?
Yeah, so no, I just wanted to jump in. Hold on a second. I was taking some notes. So I mean, I like this project. I mean, I'm going to be supportive of it. The only thing I would mention is, and like, there's been some talk about, like, you know, the stone wall, and I really do like that that's being done and so much thought's put in it. And there's been some talk about the, you know, the width of the driveway. But I think that's probably something for the DPW. So I think I would just caution that we be careful on putting conditions on here. There seems to be a precedent on that street. If you look at, there's a few houses nearby that are similar size that have that same type of driveway that the applicant is looking to put in, and they don't have stone walls. And so my suggestion would be that we don't put a condition around stone walls, because what if she decides she doesn't want to put a stone wall? I also don't think we should put a condition on the width, because that's probably more to the DPW to decide the appropriate width, because, you know, and I'm looking at Google Earth as well. I can see why it's wide. I'd imagine if that's you know, people go pretty fast down that road. I'm sure it is pretty difficult to get out of there. So I just wanted, you know, my comment would be is just, I'm supportive of this. I just would caution the conditions that we would put on, that they aren't conditions that that we don't see in other houses. Thanks.
Cheryl, go ahead.
Yes. So Tim, either can you go to Google Maps Street View or stop your screen share and allow me to do that? Now there you can see, yeah, do turn so that we can see towards the right, please, Tim. A little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, because that house there on the right side has that U-shaped driveway, one just to our right here. Yep, there you go. And you can see the stone wall is it's definitely loose laid dry, but it doesn't have a cap. Then if you pan back around a little bit the way you were coming from the other way, Tim, and zoom in a little bit there on that wall. And this is 2019 Google Maps, so I think that's actually been, well, maybe that's accurate. There's a fence there now, but the top of that wall is fairly flat. Sorry?
It does still look like that, yeah.
Yeah. So although there's a fence there. So there is a little bit of variety in the type of wall. And there's more consistent wall on let's call it the right side of the street here versus the left side where they are. So after your home, I think going then towards our right, I don't think there's more stone wall.
Not on my side, no.
Right. So I guess one thing to think about is the way that your home might be sort of like the end of the stone wall. And maybe there's a way to kind of think about where you're going to put it. If it's in between the two curb cuts so that you have an adequate amount of stone to do it in one place and not two. Because if you, Tim, pan back the other way, like your home towards Guile Road, there's a pretty continuous length of wall. So it would be better I think, to have that one gap of one curb cut and then the stone wall. Yep. So if you follow all the way up to Guile Road, that stone wall continues up to Guile, there on the right. So, and then I think it continues down further. So I think your property is really sort of the cap of it, or the end of it. And you can think of it that way with where you put the wall, I think, between the two curb cuts myself. And then if you had enough stone to do the other side, in those, again, the home across the street, Tim, where the driveway was, had a couple of taller stones at the driveway. I mean, you could sort of think of it as a way to kind of to cap it there, or you can look at the way it's handled in other parts of Canton Ave there.
Yeah, I have seen a lot of driveways because now, ever since thinking about this, all I do is look at other people's driveways. And there are a lot that have, 2 columns or 2 larger stones flanking the driveway openings, which probably would help people find our driveway.
And the other thing that I just want to point out too is the wider curb cut does allow for greater speed, but the other thing to remember is that the high school's here and people do walk on these sidewalks, and they are narrow and there are trees. And so visibility for, just seeing the pedestrians when they're there for the driver, even coming out of your driveway. And, I see that myself when we come out. The opposite side on the left there has a good visibility, but on your side, there's plenty of trees and other parts of the other side as well. So, and you can see here with that also the wider curb cut and the narrower driveway. I mean, it does allow for for someone to pull out more quickly. I mean, my experience is that Canton Ave is slow because of so much traffic. I don't see a lot of speed here myself. And I do walk Canton Ave and bike Canton Ave a fair amount. It's really having someone let you out. That's the issue I find in my 23 years of living at 660 Canton Ave.
It's usually one of the polar opposites. It's usually stopped traffic or people speeding. So,
Anyone else?
Kristen, I just have one question. Really, with mostly consideration for cost of your project, you're going to pave a section in front of your house, in order to create what you're creating. Would that not serve the purpose? And again, this is what you're going to do if you were to go forward and do it. I think is a really nice improvement to your property, but it's an expensive improvement also. And I just, for you as a resident, is there a less costly way to accomplish what you would like to do, or is this something that you really would prefer to do?
That's a good question. I have not thought of a less costly way to accomplish what we need to do. I mean, we do need a safer way to get in and out. Backing, turning around on our grass is destroying the grass, which is what we're currently doing. And making the U shape would be easier, would be safer, would be nicer looking, as you said. So yeah, so right now that's just kind of an expense that we're willing to pay to have the property be more functional for us.
Okay. Yeah. Tim, could you go back to the plan for 1 minute? I feel an obligation to suggest something to Kristen here, just as a fellow resident.
Yeah, sure.
You're going to, by this plan, you are going to create a drive right across your front lawn, effectively, right?
Correct.
Across the front of your property. Maggie had suggested modifying your driveway where you could, in order to be able to have a turning position, on your property.
Yes.
I'm suggesting something similar to what Maggie's saying, but if you created, a section off of your existing driveway, just like you're proposing, but not continue it and create a loop and then leave your property with a second opening. It would allow you to, to turn, to either back a car in, pull a car in, and reverse your direction. You follow what I'm saying? So, it would stop probably before you got to your front door. So, I'm sure you could do it in a nice material, with stone. So it would, lend itself to being in front of your house instead of pavement in front of your house. You know what I mean?
All right, so you're suggesting putting just like a circle rather than a second opening, or where the existing driveway is?
Exactly, not even a circle, but enough of an area, and I think you could do it in a really nice material, some type of paver material that would contribute to the beauty of your property, but not have a continuous driveway in a second curb cut. You're obviously welcome to pursue whatever you think is best, but I just look at what you're taking on here, and it's not an inexpensive project, yet it's really a very nice improvement, I think, to your property. So I'm not trying to discourage you from doing that, but I think kind of what I'm suggesting is similar to what Maggie had suggested earlier: an opportunity to turn a vehicle on your property without going over a lawn surface.
Right.
And you probably could save yourself a considerable amount of money.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that suggestion. Thank you. That's definitely something I'll discuss with my husband after this meeting.
Great. Anyone else?
If you did it, Kristen, my last comment on that: if you did it, I would hope that you would use something other than bituminous pavement. It's just not attractive in front of a home, So if you were to do that, I think doing it in a way that, especially where your home is, if you could do it in a material that would be aesthetically more pleasing,
Right.
where it really kind of interrupts your front lawn, I think would look a little bit better.
Of course.
So Tim and Meredith, can I just circle back to what we can, or what our jurisdiction is? I think all the suggestions and advice have been interesting and informative and hopefully helpful for Kristen. I just want to make sure that we, as she considers those, though, what we have to decide upon is the wall. I think pretty much the curb cut really is not our jurisdiction either. So I guess my suggestion would be that you consider all the things that you've heard, but as far as what we can do is approve of the rebuilding of the wall. I would make the suggestion that you start it at the edge of the driveway that exists now and build it to a height that is comparable to what's on, the other side of your driveway, and take it as far as you can go with it.
Yeah.
I like that idea.
And substitute with like stone. Yeah, that would be complementary.
Right, if you need to fill it out.
Yeah.
So that it's not a short run, that doesn't look like it's well planned.
So the other thing, Kristen, is we also like to refer to the Historical Commission for comments before making a final decision. So what we'll do is we would move to keep the public hearing open and continue this until May 26th. I spoke to the chair of the Historical Commission today, and because town meeting has been scheduled again, there was a meeting that was originally scheduled for the 18th, which the Historical Commission did not think they could do. They now can do that. So we will be able to get their comments and continue this hearing until May 26th.
Okay, great.
So that way we can have all comments. Yeah.
Yeah, and we also a couple other things. I want to follow up with the Conservation Commission and the Shade Tree Advisory Commission, which are also committees that we hear from on these matters. One thing, and I think Maggie brought it up, and I think it's a good idea, Kristen, if it would be possible for you to get a couple flags or stakes or something and kind of stake out the pathway of the driveway that you're proposing. So like starting at the opening in the stone wall and kind of moving across, your frontage, just so we can get an idea of, where the path of this driveway is gonna take. I think it'd be very helpful. If you're amenable to it, it may make sense to arrange for a visit for the planning board and other commissions, just to sort of, meet you on the property so that folks can take a look and see for themselves. It's right there on Canton Ave. I think if folks wanted to walk by themselves, they could check it out. But Kristen, if you're amenable, we could arrange something like that for an upcoming weekend, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Happy to welcome you guys here.
Tim, just a quick question.
Yep.
Is it the other boards because it's because it's crossing that wall, or is it just because of that street?
It's the planning board scenic road regulations say that you need to get the input of the Conservation Commission, the Historical Commission.
Just because it's the street though, not because of the wall, right?
Because it's a scenic road.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tim, what's the dimension? Tim, if I go by this before it's staked out, can you just, I can't read the dimension between the driveway open, between the existing and the start of the new. What is that dimension?
50 feet between.
Thank you.
It's and that's from curb cut to proposed curb cut, not necessarily driveway to driveway. So Kristen, the thing that I would ask is if you could sort of stake out the driveway. The curb cut will be what the curb cut is based on what DPW says. I think we're interested in where you're going to kind of be, popping through the wall and then kind of bringing the driveway in.
Of course.
And so if you can just get in touch with me whenever that's done, and then we can from there kind of either, I don't know if probably this weekend might be too soon, maybe next weekend we can set up a quick site visit. And then again, if the stakes are out for a week or two, folks can check out, on their own if they wanted to.
Perfect.
Yeah, Tim, I'm sorry. I'm gonna just say it again, but I know you're following the right protocol. This is not something that's unheard of on that street, and many houses, as I'm looking at the map, have this. And so, I mean, my hope is this is just a step because of what you just said in that law, and that we aren't going to be coming up with a lot of restrictions. I mean,
Rich, do you remember the recent scenic road we had on Hillside Street, where we closed the public hearing before we heard from the Historical Commission?
No. I understand. I'm just saying it because what I'm saying right now is being recorded on TV, and hopefully they hear me when they look at the map and their next door neighbor has the identical thing. I would hate to see something get denied or changed, when there's a ton of precedent on that road.
Rich, it is when you take a stone wall down or trees
there's
on
really
a scenic road. It triggers it.
I can't even see the stone wall on the map. So I mean, I know that there's a line of improvements, but yeah, it sounds like that she's making a lot of improvements. But I would again go on the record as saying that I wouldn't even want to put that as a condition, because that's to Sean's point, that is very costly to put those stones in. And if they decide that they don't want to after the fact, I don't think that should kill her project.
The other thing is just to mention, Rich, is that some of those driveway curb cuts may have been done prior to the scenic roadway being implemented and passed.
Understood. This is just my opinion, and I'm putting it out there.
Great, good. Okay, Thank you so much, Kristen. And is there anything else anyone else has to add, or? If not, I'd like to make a motion to continue the scenic road application for 693 Canton Avenue to May 26th
We say 7:10.
at 7:10. I'd like to make that motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor? Cheryl,
Yes.
Rich,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Maggie,
Yes.
and myself, yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Kristen.
Thank you.
Kristen, let's
Thank you,
be in touch
Kristen.
about staking out the driveway, and we'll arrange a site visit after that.
I will do that. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks.
Okay, so moving on to new business. We now have a presentation and discussion of the Milton Village Design Guidelines. Tim, do you want to introduce Dotson Flinker and we can move them in?
Meredith, could I make one comment before we do this? Tim?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just, I'm obviously new to this, right? So I think I've only been a member for 2 weeks, but I think the volume of information, you know, and I did manage my way through it. 2 documents, one 43 pages long and the second one 18. I really think for what we're trying to do for the residents of the town, the time than 2 days would be better for all of us on any board if we're asked to review and comment.
Yes, Sean, this is just an introduction of the draft and the introduction of the presentation. We're going to have follow-up meetings and, you know, this is just an introduction. I think, you know, we'll have plenty of time and we want to make sure that we have other, the Historical Commission, the Master Plan Implementation Committee. We want to allow comments and time. This is just an introduction to the presentation.
Yeah,
Okay, I happened to read the email that Dylan wrote, and maybe I shouldn't have read the email, but it led me to the conclusion that you were looking for comments from us today.
If people have them, but this is not the only opportunity. There'll be plenty of other opportunity.
Okay. Thanks for
Yeah,
the clarification, Meredith.
And Sean, the way to think about this one, this is not, you know, this isn't, you know, someone coming in with an application. These are your guidelines, and you know, so, you know, within the confines of the contract that we've got with Dotson and Flinker, we've got, you know, the availability for iteration on these guidelines, but you know, they're your thing. So, you know, you need to, you know, if you need more time and you need to have additional conversation, that's the board's prerogative, you know, to do that. So, you know, we got them in the board's hands as soon as we could. I think it's valuable to hear directly from the design team about what they produce. But you know, we've got until, you know, June 30th to kind of sew this up. So it's a lot of material, but still, you know, plenty of time. And I think, again, it's the board's prerogative to do this and to review it in a way that it thinks is the most appropriate. So, you know, you're the boss.
Yeah, no, I understand, and you know, even in a quick review, I have 8, probably 10, either questions or comments. So I'm just a little anxious of what we're trying to accomplish by the 30th of June, and probably Meredith's neighbors would be very interested in making sure that whatever we accomplish by the 30th of June is something consistent with what they want too. So anyhow, so
Thank you, Sean.
So we've got Dylan Sussman, and I think Peter is with us. He's not on my screen, but it's because, is he? I don't know.
Here, I don't know if he's been promoted.
Let me try again to get him into the, we'll promote him. Sometimes the dialog box comes up and you miss it and it goes away. But so Dylan and Peter are the team from Dotson and Flinker that have been working on the design guidelines for Milton Village. Sent along some draft materials the other day. And I think what I asked Dylan and Peter to do by way of presentation tonight is to sort of hit the highlights of what they've produced and then kind of drill down into the areas where they feel that they need additional input from the board or some sort of a decision from the board. And then obviously, to the extent that you all have comments or questions right now, is a great time to make them known. So I won't take any more of their time. Dylan and Peter, take it away.
Yeah, and I think we're on your agenda for 2 weeks from now as well, or the 26th. So again, the idea was to give a little introduction tonight and then to give you guys time to have a more detailed review and give us comments. So I'm going to share my screen, like Tim said. I'm going to try to walk through the highlights. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. For some reason, oh, excuse me. That is the wrong document. That's why it looked funny. Okay, so Milton Village Design Guidelines. I can't see you all when I share in this Zoom format, so feel free to just speak up. I won't see you raising your hands or anything. So just to start, this is obviously a historic image of Milton Village. I think it's a great one because it illustrates sort of the historic development pattern in Milton Village, and sort of the way that there was more industrial uses down by the water, and as you stepped up the hill, it transitioned to more residential scale uses along High Street. And so that pattern of transition and of different sized buildings that goes back in history, I think is very interesting, and also carries through to the zoning and we hope to the design guidelines. Okay, so the administration of this would be by the planning board, as part of special permit review for people who are proposing a plan unit development in the Milton Village mixed use overlay district. The audience is for permit applicants, so they know before they apply what it is the planning board wants. And then it's for you all to guide your review. Specifically, there are some standards in the zoning, some design standards. So hopefully it helps you interpret what those standards are and then adds additional guidance for site plan review and special permit review. And then it's also for abutters and other residents of Milton so they know what to expect and everybody can be on the same page. The general approach is that there's a set of design principles at 2 levels. There are cross-cutting design principles that are sort of the big picture ideas for Milton Village. And then there are principles for individual topics like buildings and the public realm and site design and so on. And then there are ideas for how you could assess proposals to ascertain whether they're attaining the principles, meeting the principles or not. The ideas that are in the design guidelines came from reviewing the past planning for Milton Village. That goes back to the master plan and deeper into history than that. Looking at the existing conditions of Milton Village, we've met with the planning board on site and then once in a Zoom meeting, and we had a public forum. And then also looking at other design guidelines and the kinds of things that they're saying, looking for the best ideas out there. So the cross-cutting design principles are to implement Milton's planning goals and the vision for Milton Village. There's been a lot of work done already. So we want to make sure that that is respected in the approval of projects. The second one is to have new development build off historic precedents, but not to necessarily mimic those historic precedents exactly, but to sort of innovate off of them. So Milton Village, the buildings in Milton Village reflect a number of different historic architectural styles, which evolved over time. So the idea with this is that that evolution would continue, but not in a sort of disruptive way, in a sensitive way that picks up with the historic styles that people love in Milton Village. The next one is to utilize the sloping terrain to create a unique sense of place and harmonize different scales of development. That's shown in that sort of vision drawing from the MPIC Master Plan Implementation Committee's work. And it's also encoded in the zoning where there's greater heights allowed on Adams Street than on High Street. So the Milton Village is sloping in two different directions, right? It's sloping from the river up towards Canton Ave, I believe it is. And then it's also sloping from Adams Street up to High Street. And so dealing with those slopes is pretty integral to getting Milton Village correct, or to be the best it can be. The fourth principle is design for pedestrians first. Fifth is to use quality design to attract residential and economic growth and make this a great place to be, which is coming from the public forum largely, where people were saying like, they really want this to be a special place and they care a lot about the design of it. The sixth principle is to design for sustainability. And then the seventh is to connect to the open space resources. So the Ponset River is really important, and the trail, the rail trail is really important as well. Does anybody have any questions before I move on from here? Okay. You all still there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Thank you.
Like
It's
I
great.
said,
It's really great.
I can't see you as I'm presenting, which is unnerving for me. Okay, so building design. I just picked out some of what I thought were the key ideas. Obviously, there's more than this in the design guidelines, but I thought these were sort of some of the high points. So one of the key ideas, which is both in the building design section and in the public realm section, is that buildings should line the street and shape public spaces. So, key principle of urban design, buildings should be, for a village center, a mixed use place, they should be right up close to the edge of the sidewalk. So that people walking down the street can see into buildings and they have a strong connection to those ground floor uses. And how that shape gets, how that space gets shaped is crucial to your sense of the place. So the dimensions of the sidewalks compared to the dimensions of the sidewalks and the street as a whole compared to the heights of the buildings. The next principle is related to that. The design standards mention step backs. So that's when the upper story of a building is pushed back further from a lot line than the lower stories. So it mentions step backs, and we're sort of saying in the design guidelines what we think is appropriate. So having a 5 to 10 foot step back above the third story on Adams Street and above the second story on High Street. And then when there's a design standard that refers to when a new building is adjacent to an existing historic 1 or 2 family dwelling, that there should be horizontal setbacks and also step backs. So we're proposing that a step back would be appropriate when you go greater than 1 story above a historic 1 or 2 family dwelling. So again, architecture should build from precedents and not mimic historic styles. So there's a fine line there, right? Like you don't want to do something that's exactly what was done in the past, but it also shouldn't be discontinuous. And so the design guidelines, to some degree, leave that they are asking the project proponent to demonstrate to you, the board, what the precedent is that they're building off of it and how they're building off of it. And the design guidelines include some sort of, it lays out some of the key historic periods and some examples of those buildings and some of the features of them as sort of an example for the applicants. In terms of roofs, I think it makes sense to have a preference for gable, hip, and flat roofs because that's predominantly what's in Milton Village. Facades should have some sort of underlying ordering system, which makes sense to be related to the structural base of the building. And they should have a base body and a cap. So The bottom right image there is a pretty good example of a building that has a base, a body, and a cap. There should be a prominent front door that faces the street. I feel like we shouldn't have to tell people that, but we do. And there's a further guideline that there should be a maximum of 50 feet between doors on the front facade. And that's the kind of thing that, you know, that number can be what you want it to be, or the standard cannot be there at all. So we're looking for, we'll be looking for input on that kind of thing. Porches, sets a minimum size so that porches are functional. I question whether porches are appropriate on Adams Street. I think they probably make sense on High Street. Not sure they would make sense on Elliott Street. So looking for feedback there. Windows should vertically align. So there's a trend in contemporary architecture to not have windows vertically aligned because it's not necessarily structurally necessary for them to align with some current building practices. But from what I see, pretty much every historic building in Milton Village has windows that vertically align. It's a pretty strong characteristic of historic buildings. So I think it's something that would make sense to carry forward. And then limiting the number of sizes and shapes of windows. We propose 5 at the most in the design guidelines, and setting a minimum amount of glazing on the ground floor. One question I have for you all is whether there should be a requirement that buildings be recessed behind facades. So, you know, with masonry construction, the windows were set back, which creates a pretty strong shadow line, which is a defining feature of buildings like the ones in Milton Village, at least the brick ones. And even with wood construction, typically the windows were recessed. Again, it's something that's not necessarily necessary anymore, but is it something that's valuable? In terms of materials, we didn't get too much into actual specific materials. The design standards already state a preference for traditional New England materials like brick, wood, stone, and composite that looks like wood. What we talked about instead was focusing on durability and authenticity. So I have some questions. You know, there are some people who think materials don't belong in zoning. I guess that's my opinion. The line on that one is that there's something that are regulated by the building code and therefore shouldn't be regulated by zoning.
Cheryl had a comment.
Great.
If she could just.
Yeah, thanks, Meredith. It's a question. Some of these things that you said that you would like our feedback on,
yeah,
I didn't find necessarily expressed in the guidelines themselves. Some things that you're highlighting here. So do you plan to share this with us so that we can think about it for our next meeting? The things that you're telling us right now that you want our feedback on?
Sure, yeah. Are you saying you didn't see them in the guidelines, or I just didn't? In the guidelines, there weren't comments saying the things that we were curious about.
Yeah, in the guidelines, there was 1 or 2 places that maybe said, like the porches, I recall you asked about, but other things that where you haven't asked about, because I do have thoughts about some of these things that you've mentioned tonight, but I want to make sure that I don't have to go back and watch the tape to find out what they are. Because I don't find them in the standards. That's all.
Sounds good.
Or in the guidelines.
Okay. And does anybody have any comments on these things right now? On any of these?
Yeah, I just think that one of the things I'm just going to point out is that, you know, where the windows are in relationship to the face of the building is really something as an architect that we have to work a lot on with various other goals. So for example, if you want a highly energy efficient building, you're going to need exterior insulation. So where does the window attach to the structure, you know, and how, so there's a lot of things that go, how does it flash? There's a lot of things that go into where that window is placed that's not purely visual.
Yep.
And there's, a lot of building science in it. And I just want to make sure that we understand that when we put these together.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I'm raising the question. Is there is a trade-off. There's a trade-off with all of these guidelines, right? So
I do like the idea of putting in, for example, the design standards having materials in there. I think it gives, it encourages a certain look. I think, what I like about the way you've written this is that we are allowed to look at, when an actual project comes in and make some exceptions. But I think we need to have, it's good to have a level of expectation. And traditional New England materials, brick, wood, stone, composite, that looks like wood, would be very appropriate for this area. But there may be an alternative that somebody brings to us that we would, that we would say that's fine. But I do, giving some guidance on our the materials that we would like to see. I think it is helpful. On that.
These are already in the standards. And
Yeah.
so they're not, the standards can't be removed unless there was
Right.
a zoning amendment that went through town meeting.
Right,
So,
right. Exactly. So these are not being removed. Okay. That's,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I was just what I was saying is I didn't feel like it was necessary to go further and be like, there should be red cedar
right.
shapes,
Right.
or there should be copper awnings.
Yeah, so my architect input on that too is it's really going to depend on the construction type, whether, you have to use non-flammable materials, and whether you have a fire, like a lot of these buildings are close together, you're going to need a fire rating at those exterior walls. You're not going to be able to have a flammable material. So you have to really not dictate here that things that don't meet building code, or try and tie the hands of the design professionals too much.
Yep. Okay.
Cheryl, I guess I ask you as an architect, one of the concerns that I have is allowing materials that we just wouldn't want. And somewhere in the design guideline, I recall seeing a reference to vinyl. And
Yeah, that's expressly prohibited in the standard, Sean. So that's in the
Okay.
zone.
okay. Good, because I don't think it fits.
Sean, just
Probably existing buildings with it though.
In the village area?
Most of those high street buildings don't have their original siding, and I'm guessing it's vinyl and aluminum on most of those two families and on High Street.
Is that right?
just to throw in here too. So actually, I'm sorry, now that I'm talking, I do have some thoughts and comments, but I think I'm going to hold them. I like the idea of if this is coming back with some notes on, additional places where you'd like suggestions. The only thing, I don't know if it'd be appropriate here, Meredith or Tim, because we're talking about standards and guidelines. Standards are, required, mandatory, guidelines are not. And so I don't know if, we're kind of throwing those terms around and we're talking about so I feel like we should, for the public, explain what we're talking about here, because these are guidelines, these are not standards.
Yeah, so the zoning that was adopted and is in place already has a set of standards in it, which are mandatory. They say shall. And then the guidelines are their guidance for the board and for applicants to use when trying to determine whether a project meets the special permit criteria and the site plan approval criteria.
Awesome.
So the guidelines have, for the planning board, though, there's red italicized text in the guidelines that are the actual, cut and paste standards from the zoning. They're incorporated into the guidelines just to make it easier for you guys to work with the document.
So to Rich's point though, and also further explanation, the standards that are in the zoning, as I mentioned, I think briefly there, if those were to be changed, that would require the usual process for a zoning change, which would go through town meeting. And these guidelines are just approval by the board itself. So they can be changed from time to time with a vote by the board. However, what we did build into the standards in the zoning is the right for the planning board to waive a particular standard for good reason in terms of the application. So there is some flexibility built in as well. And that was deemed at the time to be something important.
Thank you both. I just wanted to make sure we talked that through, just because I know, because when we talk about adding stuff or require, like, if, I don't know if anybody's used the word require, but, you know, showing folks what they should be doing when they go here. These are guidelines, so they aren't the standards. And so, but I just want us to consider that when we're doing this. But I like all the comments that were being made. I just wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page.
Okay. I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is the public realm. So like I said before, key idea is that the sites should be designed to shape the public realm, space between buildings on the street, and then any public spaces that are adjacent to buildings. There's a guideline that says basically that small setbacks are okay when they're used to enhance the streetscape. So there's both the idea of having buildings align with each other to create a consistent edge to the sidewalk, but also allowing them to bump back a little bit from the sidewalk for good uses. And that also goes along with a standard that's in the zoning that says that if buildings are longer than 40 feet, they need to be broken up into basically 20-foot sections with a projection or recess portion of the facade and some other techniques. The next one there is to define the transition between the public and private spaces. So, you know, having applicants think through which portions of their site are public and which are private, and communicating that with the design of the front part of their site. Traditionally, that was done by, if you have a storefront, it's got a lot of glass, it's got a recessed entry, it's right up on the sidewalk. If you have a residential building, historically that would have often had steps, and the first floor would be slightly elevated. People don't do that elevated part with steps quite as much anymore. So figuring out how to do that in a new way so that the private spaces stay private and the public spaces stay clearly public. And that's particularly interesting in Milton Village, where along Adams Street, you're sloping down. And so there are a lot of grade changes that have to be addressed, and a lot of those sites have retaining walls. So the design of those retaining walls and how to get the ground floor elevation at the entrance lining up with the sidewalk is a key thing for the future of Milton Village.
So one thing I want to point out here too is that on that point, that original image that you showed, which I think is probably from the 19th century, it doesn't show any retaining walls. And I think those retaining walls are a newer feature. So that would be kind of good to dig into a little bit, because my understanding from some conversations when I worked on this on the Master Plan Implementation Committee was that there's fill behind those walls that was added at a later time. And so I wouldn't want those walls to be a mandatory requirement, you know. And the other thing I want to point out at this point too is the ramps. The handicapped accessibility is going to be a real challenge depending upon the length of these facades. If you say you're going to avoid ramps, then you might be encouraging a lift, which I think would be worse, you know, than a ramp. And so we have to be careful about what we're encouraging or discouraging here. So you might say, if you're saying avoid ramps, along the frontage, I understand that, but the depth of some of these sites is really also not very deep.
Yep.
And so if you're going to not have a ramp on the front, you might end up having somebody come into the building and then have a lift. I'm not sure we want to dictate how we're handling accessibility, I guess is my point.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Yeah, I mean, I think the Associates building is a good example, right? Where it's sloping along the site and it manages to have a lot of entrances that are all at grade, right? And basically the upper stories are, I don't know if you all can see me, but the upper stories are like this and the ground floor is sloping like this. And basically the ground floor gets taller as it goes along the site. Okay, so moving on to on-street parking. So High Street is very narrow. And High Street's very narrow. It's recently had its sidewalks reconstructed. But one possibility for the planning board to consider, and I guess the DPW as well, is whether you would accept essentially moving back the sidewalk onto private property and allowing on-street parking that would also be on private property. So it's basically a funky way of dealing with a very narrow street where on-street parking might be desirable, or it may not be. So it's a question for you all.
There are some parking areas that are off street that are set back on High Street for some offices that are fronting on Adam Street. There is some precedent for that being done, but I just don't know how many of that. There's a lot of residential homes also on the upper part of that road, which that would not be possible.
Right, yeah, it should be for new construction, and so
those existing parking spaces are for the private use of those property owners, though they're not public.
Right.
I'm not sure that this is something desirable. We only have limited area, which already has curbside parking. So I'm not sure, and I can't visualize an example. I mean, if you can maybe give an example of what you were thinking that this might work. Otherwise, I don't want it to cause confusion for somebody down the road, or even for the board down the road.
Yeah, so there's an image in the design guidelines, a couple images that you can take a look at it, how it works. Yeah, I mean, so it wouldn't be for nose-in parking, it would be for parallel parking. And the idea would be to try to move away from the big, long open curb cuts that there are on High Street for the nose-in parking on private property. But anyway, it's something to consider. Happy to remove it from the design guidelines if it doesn't make sense for Milton Village. Another thing that is accomplished in that section is defining the parts of the public realm or of the sidewalk. So it establishes like if there's an edge zone, which is area between the curb and where the furniture goes, then there's the furnishing and utility zone, which is where the street trees and the benches and the street lights go. Then there's the pedestrian throughway, which is the part we think of as the sidewalk where we move. And then there's the frontage zone, which is where you might have planters or sidewalk seating or just space to enter and exit from buildings. And so it sets a minimum recommended width of the pedestrian throughway of 6 feet, and then says if you have extra room, put it toward the furnishing and utility zone next. And then I believe it says put it toward the frontage zone after that and put it towards the edge zone after that. We could go further and specify dimensions for the furnishing and utility zone and the frontage zone if you wanted. The sidewalk widths vary currently, and the design standards say that if there's less than 6 feet, then the front setback would be increased so that, I believe what it says is so that you could have a 10-foot, it would be increased to 10 feet, I think is what it says. So the reason for including these guidelines is just start to move towards defining how it is you want to use that space. Yeah, okay. We'll stop on that one. We talked about ramps, and then finally, the guidelines encourage adding curb bump outs where appropriate, adding raised crosswalks where appropriate, and suggest materials for crosswalk improvements. And so that ties into the district improvement incentives that are built into the zoning. So the zoning allows additional height if the applicant provides district improvements that the planning board deems worthy. So I think
Well, that's one of my actually significant comments, is that there's a bonus for 3 different things. One includes these improvements, but another is for increased affordable housing percentage, and another is towards historic preservation. So if we're going to call out one of them in these guidelines, then we need to call them out, or at least make it clear that it's only one of the ways to get
Right.
the bonus.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good. Just gonna write that down. Yeah. So I guess my question on that one is, do you all need further guidance on what would be acceptable or not, or in terms of qualifying for an incentive? And I was thinking primarily of the district improvement incentive, because I thought that the affordable housing incentive and the historic preservation incentive was pretty clear as it was. But after this meeting, take a look at those incentives and let me know if you need more guidance.
On this one, one other comment is that it contemplated improvements to Milton Landing, not just to, I mean, some people said, every project should be required to do the public realm improvements as part of the project. There should be no incentive granted for just that, right? So if you've got a 50-foot wide piece of property, you should be improving the sidewalk in front of it. But so it was something where, okay, well, maybe depending upon the level of improvement, maybe there's something there and some contribution to the fund for the public improvement down at the landing. So it would be in the judgment of the planning board, what would constitute enough public realm improvement to authorize us to grant the incentive. But as far as like the design, the level of design work that we're talking about, I mean, in terms of the public realm, this seems right to me in terms of what you're trying to call out. It should be there.
Okay. Should it be there to the point of trying to define the dimensions? I mean,
what I don't think you should do is try and define what's the right level to grant the incentive. Let the planning board do that.
Yeah.
Because we don't do that. We're not covering that anywhere else in here. We're only covering, the design components. We're not addressing level of improvement required to get a bonus.
Right. That makes sense to me. Okay. So vehicular access and parking, limit driveway width, misspelling there, width to 24 feet. There's a guideline that says you can't have service parking within 50 feet of the front lot line. And and that a garage entrance shouldn't face the street. That last one, it's going to be,
I don't think that's one of
challenging.
the standards.
No, none of these are standards.
No, I would not, some of these parcels wouldn't be able to have a garage then if you did that one. The last one.
Right.
And I'm not
yeah.
even sure about, have you tested this against any of the property lines, like 50 feet? Some of these properties are just so small, especially up on High Street.
Right, yeah, and I think the question is, are you assuming that for this implementation that the parcels will be consolidated between High and Adams? Or are you thinking that they're going to be maintained separate properties?
Well, I think you could very well have both. When I was doing some analysis, because of that topographic change, you could, even if you did consolidate the properties, you might come in with parking for residential from High Street and come in from Adams Street for parking for commercial. You know, you don't, so that you don't have to have an internal ramp, that
Right.
you're using the natural topography and you're saving that floor area. So
I think this is one to come back to. This,
yeah,
we should all think about this a little bit, but
Yeah.
I can see what you're saying. That's
Yeah, I mean, basically they're really narrow properties, and so it's tough to get the parking in there. And the natural way to lay it out is to have a garage kind of in the middle of the building, so you can drive in and pull into your parking spots, which doesn't make for the nicest sidewalk experience.
right.
And in the public forum, people responded pretty negatively to garage doors on the street.
but then people also wanted to make sure that we had parking more than what some of us thought we needed. So you
Right.
have to be able to put it somewhere and you have to be able to get to it. So it's
Yeah.
a balance.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think we'll end up talking more about that one, but I agree with all of you. It's a difficult trade-off. I think we have to encourage as much parking as we can on sites. And I agree with where you started with the Cheryl. I think if we prevent a garage entrance from facing the street, we're going to create a challenge with being able to park on sites in buildings.
So I'm hearing that last one's probably doesn't make sense. The second one may not make sense as well. But you guys are gonna, I also heard you'll think about it, and like all of this, we'll discuss it more in the future.
I also actually think the driveway width could be less than 24 feet.
I was wondering, based on the discussion I heard earlier.
Yeah.
Well,
agree with
I do a lot of work in Boston, and even multifamily developments in Boston, they're saying 10 to 12 feet. And you're gonna have to figure out how to get people coming and going, how to manage it on site. They really want to narrow those curb cuts. So yeah, 24 feet seems like it would be very disruptive to the pedestrian experience as well.
Yep.
And these aren't going to be large parking areas. You're not going to have like a big queue like you would at a mall or someplace,
All right, I'm happy to talk about that more. Also happy to set it lower. So moving on to landscaping. So basic principle landscaping should define spaces, soften edges, and screen objectionable features. Guideline encourages low impact development techniques, which is basically using plants and soil to infiltrate stormwater. It encourages the use of native plants, encourages the use of a variety of types of plants. So not just grass, but having a variety of ground covers, perennials, grasses, shrubs, trees, different sizes, different shapes, different appealing characteristics like branching or flowers and so on. It says that lawn should be minimized, which came directly from the public input at the forum. And then it recommends that street trees, when new ones are added, they should be spaced 30 feet on center. with, obviously wiggle room there, and planted in a 5 by 10 bed with a minimum of 6 to 1,000 square feet of root space. So 600 to 1,000 square feet of root space. Those can be difficult to actually pull off those dimensions, but they're dimensions that support actually having trees live to a reasonable age and achieve a reasonable size. So the root space is, important so that the roots can get big enough to support the tree, and then the surface area so that there's enough air and water getting to those roots. Lighting, the principle there is to provide the minimum amount of light necessary.
Sorry, can I just
yeah.
go back one on that?
Yep.
The sidewalks in the report, you have the sidewalks along Adams Street are 11 to 15 feet and 5 to 7 on High Street. And if you have 5 feet for the tree pit, and let's say that's right next to the curb, and you have a 6-foot walking area, then most places you're not going to even have room. Well, you won't have room for the trees on High unless you cut into the property. And then we can't really mandate that. And then the other thing is on Adams Street, you won't have any room for street furnishings, outside the businesses. I think that 5 feet can be narrowed down, at least it has been in other towns and cities. So again, do we want to push somebody in the direction of having the 5-foot tree, but not having any room for any, tables and chairs if they have a cafe or an ice cream shop? Because that's the kind of business I think a lot of people are hoping we're going to get there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think so a couple things on that. One is, am I correct that the standard says that if you have less than 6 feet of sidewalk, you've got to push your building back to 10 feet? So that, and again, I don't remember whether it said 10 feet setback or 10 feet total.
I think it was 10 feet total.
10
is
feet
what
total.
I read.
So,
Not for 10.
and then the tree pit can be surfaced with like a permeable rubber mulch, so that it's a walkable, accessible surface, but providing the water to the tree. And then you're spacing your trees out, so there's space between them to provide space for cafes and benches and so on. So I definitely agree with you that there's a trade-off, right? Between all of these elements, there's not a lot of room in the public realm to fit all the stuff that you want to fit to make a really vibrant place. And so there's a trade-off between trees and furnishing and everything else.
Dylan, sorry, this is Peter. Would that include, like for your 5 by 10 bed, could you put some kind of hard surface, but semi-permeable paver over it?
Yeah, that's what I was just saying. You could do like a semi-permeable paver, or you could do the rubber,
right?
The permeable rubber.
Yeah, I think even if you added that language about either the grates or whatever, the pavers, I think it could be helpful to explain that you really do understand that this is not going to be something that's impossible to achieve, or that there'll be a big sacrifice in something else in order to achieve it.
It was interesting. I was just in New York City in the West Village, and I was just focused on, it's narrow sidewalks, and they did have some very large planting beds, and you could see how the root system, the trees were able to mature, and the roots do grow up. And matter of fact, I was walking up Adams Street, walking my dog, and where one of this really small tree pits, the sidewalk was being pulled up because the roots it was cracking a new sidewalk, and it was breaking, it was definitely on its way to making trouble for pedestrians walking. So I think a nice sized street bed can actually be a focal point, and with tree guards or whatever we would do, to something to make it to really enhance that streetscape. So, but we can always make exceptions to that, I think, if it doesn't fit and it's not the right size.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's and then there are other more expensive things you can do to help your trees survive. And so again, it's a question of how important is it to have trees that are going to survive and live to maturity? People like trees, but in our urban places, we kind of consistently use practices that ensure that the trees are not going to live to maturity. And so that's fine if that's what we want. Most places are not willing to require applicants to spend a lot of money to ensure enough space for the trees.
So one thing that I'm just going to throw out here, which is not going to be something for these guidelines, but something for the board and probably the DPW to consider, is what are the total width of Adams Street could be looked at so that the sidewalks could be widened and so that you could get adequate trees there. I think it's pretty wide myself. I think it encourages faster driving, faster speeds, I should say. But that, again, that's not for the guidelines, but I guess maybe you could put in the guidelines that if the, if the town were to undertake that kind of modification or revision or whatever you want to call it, that would be one way to widen the sidewalks.
Or could we even do trees down the middle of the road, kind of like Brook Road? So you're not doing it on the sidewalks, but so you're not taking away from the sidewalk space.
It's worth looking into.
Yeah, I think those trees on the sidewalk are pretty important for shading the sidewalk and creating a buffer between cars moving down the street and the people on the sidewalk. I think if you can have a median with trees in addition to that, that's even better.
One might also say you should have a bike lane instead of wider sidewalks. So, I mean, there's a trade-off. There are trade-offs to what can happen here. But even the bike lane would help slow the traffic down, hopefully, if it's done well enough. But wide roadways encourage fast, higher speeds. That's, I think, a well-known traffic or urban planning or design, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So I mean, I think what we find with the design guidelines is the more you know what the design is that you want to implement, the easier it is to write the guidelines. And so it's sort of advance the design, then you could advance the guidelines. So if you knew exactly what you wanted for a streetscape plan for Milton Village, you could tell your applicants exactly what it is they should do. Where you know less, the guidance is going to be a little bit more vague because you haven't worked out where you fall on the trade-offs, and then just technically how to put everything together. I'm going to move on to lighting, or I guess I already started to do that. So provide the minimum amount of lighting necessary, use a larger number of less intense fixtures instead of a few really bright fixtures. Minimize glare and light spillover, use full cutoff fixtures, meaning the light is prevented from going up into the sky, and then encouraging using fixtures with a cutoff less than 90 degrees, and encouraging a maximum height of fixtures of 12 to 15 feet. So those are all basically aimed at creating pedestrian scale lighting on streets and on sidewalks and on sites, and so on. Any comments on that one?
No.
Okay. Whoops. And then signage, minimize the number of signs. Signs should be consistent with the design of the project. And so the zoning doesn't allow projecting signs except Basically, the way I understand it is you need special permission from the select board. And so I personally think that projecting signs are a pedestrian friendly thing to have. So this is a question for the board. It seems like you have a little wiggle room because the select board can allow projecting signs, but I'm not totally clear on what the process for that is. And then I found a mention in the zoning of a town's sign review committee. And I was wondering if that really exists. So this is just a general question of, do you think projecting signs make sense?
yeah.
And if so, is it possible in Milton to do them under your current zoning?
We do have a sign review committee, and we do have signage design guidelines, separate guidelines.
Oh,
And the planning board doesn't have a role typically in approving signage. It is either if it's allowed by right, it just goes to the building commissioner. If it requires a permit, it does go to the select board. It's something where I do think the planning board should have some kind of review power in, especially when you're looking at this whole district and all of a sudden you can't have a blade sign. I absolutely agree with you. Tim, did I get that right in terms of the signage jurisdiction?
Please don't have the planning board be involved in signs. I'm actually double checking right now because
It is the select board. Yeah, it's a select board that
well, that's actually not true.
Sorry, go ahead.
What were you going to say, Meredith?
We have a sign review committee. And the applicant who, somebody who owns a commercial space would go through that process.
Right.
But I think it is finally signed off by the select board, but
No.
I could be wrong.
So signs in the business district, this is a change we made, I think, in 2017 or 2018. There was people are probably remembering like an interim period where we had some different illuminated sign guidelines that went directly to the select board for public hearing. But signs in the business district go from the building commissioner to the sign review committee with the recommendation back to the building commissioner. The issue that winds up happening is we have so many businesses and so many other places that have signage outside of the business district, and our sign bylaw only applies to business district signs. So, Meredith, I was a little unfair when I said that wasn't true. As it relates to the zoning, there is no role for the select board, but for all of the other signs, for all of the other non-conforming businesses in residential districts, ultimately there's either a variance procedure or a select board approval. All of which is to say, I tend to agree with Dylan. I like a projecting sign. I think if we don't already allow it, we should. Yeah, I staffed the sign review committee. I had a streak of like 8 straight months of sign review committee meetings. There were a lot of signs coming in, so I got really quickly reacquainted with the sign bylaw.
So the answer, Tim, is we don't right now allow those in. Those.
I'm double checking right now, but I think.
My read of it was that you guys don't allow them, but the select board can approve, can allow them.
So Dylan, did you find that in the non-up-to-date zoning code? Because the sign, our bylaws, have been modified a number of times since the last update in our zoning code.
This is the other thing that I was trying to dance around a little bit.
I'm not dancing around it because I'm not letting go of it. It's frustrating for people like you who go look for our bylaws and the updates aren't there yet. So
how we trick you.
Yeah, all right.
Well,
so now I'm thoroughly confused.
Tim, I think if you could help them on the signage one, I think it would be helpful, because I do think it should be in there to what the process is. And I meant to say this and I forgot, but on the street trees, we do have a shade tree advisory committee, and they do have a list of recommended trees. So we should refer to that committee and that list in the guidelines as well.
Yeah, and I'll take a closer look at what Dylan Dylan and Peter have put together as it relates to signage and see if there's anything that's inconsistent or whatever. And I'll be in touch with them about that.
I like those signs too. Just they kind of go with, like, if you're trying to make a village feel. I mean, you see those types of signs in a lot of towns.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right. All right, so we move on to sustainability. So this section encourages, this is one that Cheryl, I think, is going to hate. Encourages local materials, low carbon materials, green roofs, energy efficient buildings, renewable energy infrastructure. Says projects should conduct an energy and carbon modeling and life cycle analysis. Again, it encourages low impact development, encourages green walls, and then it encourages things like installing bike racks and bus shelters, recycling.
No, why did you say I would hate this?
Well, because it's getting into the realm of like the already really tricky stuff that architects have to do. And it is sort of getting into building code things.
Yeah, well, you already gave the caveat that, things that are regulated elsewhere. But no, I've been trying to get our stormwater regs, encouraging our engineering department to update our stormwater regs so that we can do low impact development. So I'm not opposed to this at all, Dylan.
Oh, good.
The more push we can get, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
I like it. I'm sorry, can I ask a question? This is probably not the place, like the place you'd put it, but I know it's tough to put in, put in your bylaws that you can't like bring fossil fuels in, things like that. Does anybody start with guidelines? Can you put things like that in guidelines, or is that something that needs to be put in, like, just to build the zoning itself?
Yeah, I mean, so what it says is, I think it says it encourages renewable energy like solar and geothermal.
Yeah.
So it's in there like the rest of this as a guideline.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, one thing that could have been interesting if we thought about it a few years ago was to do an incentive bonus to go with a very high level of sustainability in the building. So do passive house, level of construction, net zero carbon, all electric, no parking, because those would hit, if we're going to really meet the state's goals for carbon reduction, those are the kinds of things that we have to do. But maybe that could be an amendment.
Yeah, right.
Right. And then the last one is just the waterfront and trail connections. So it says that new development should provide visual and physical access to the waterfront and the Ponset Trail where it's possible, meaning where that's physically possible. And that improvements along the river should consider future flooding based on climate change projections. And I think both of those things are, that the access is really important. It's crucial step for this area. The section is very short, so take a look and see if there are other ideas that you think belong in there.
The one thing I would say here to think about that photograph on the right, that building owner is beginning a lengthy and complex permitting process to improve that property.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think thinking a little bit more about the fact that that's kind of tucked away, but you get through it from the public side on the sidewalk through the arch in the door or along the bike path. And so that connectivity, I think that pedestrian connectivity and bicycle connectivity to that space could be something to think about.
Right. Yeah, and that's why, I phrased it as providing visual and physical access, right? So you can't, I think you can encourage people to provide physical access, but, can't exactly require them to none of this is requiring, but there's only so far you can go in strongly encouraging them to provide public access to their private land, right?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a public use that they're proposing, like a brew pub, you know, having people be able to get to it is all the better. It's going to lack visibility on the street, which is usually a pretty key requirement for retail.
Yeah. So definitely take a look at this section and see if you have more ideas of what it is you would want to require there. Or maybe it's, do you want to have a map and the guideline that calls out the key connections you're trying to make? That's another possibility.
Dylan, did I remember seeing something that referred to permeable surfaces adjacent to the waterfront? Did I?
Yeah, that sounds, yep.
I think there's something in your report, and I like that a lot. I thought that was good, not to just pave over and have solid impervious surfaces.
Right. Yeah, I think there was a guideline in there that you shouldn't have big parking lots or other large paved areas next to the water.
So I like that. Yeah.
Great. All right. So that's the walkthrough of the draft design guidelines. I'm going to stop sharing. There you are. Any other comments or things you guys want to tell us now?
I think this was an excellent first draft. I think it was it's very dense, so I think we all have to sort of process it and take time with it. There's a lot to take in, and but I was very impressed. I thought it was a good way to capture a lot of the work that the Master Plan Implementation Committee, all the work Cheryl did. I think you captured the spirit of that area and the historic nature, and I think we're moving in the right direction. So.
Just have a question, Peter and Dylan. Were you planning to add any more diagrams or photographs? Because we in the profession understand some of the language and strategies, but not everyone does, and not everyone on the board, down the road will. So, I can go through and look at it again with that eye towards which ones I think could use some explanation or further diagrams, but you probably have an idea as well.
Yeah, that would, both of yes, and it would be great if you went through and called out the things that you think could use more clarity through a diagram. And yes, we plan on adding diagrams and photographs. We wanted to get the text in there first so that we're not wasting a lot of time on images that may not end up in there. So, the big picture question for you guys really is, are these the right topics? Is the level of detail correct? Is it too much? Is it not enough? Are there guidelines in here that you don't think should be in there? Are there ones that are missing? I think that you're going to have to work with this. You're going to have to use it in reviewing projects. So I would recommend you go through it, and for everything that's in there, think, really, do I care enough about this that I want to actually tell an applicant that they have to actually follow it and talk about it in a meeting?
One of the things that I would suggest that you put forth in the beginning is that it's not that we understand that there will be give and take, and that there might be contradictions. I felt like, and I read it, but I haven't studied it as thoroughly as I want to. But even in my first reading, I felt as if there were probably some contradictions. So like if you did one thing, would you actually be able to do something that you saw later in the guidelines? And so I don't think that's necessarily a problem, as long as we give a caveat that the expectation is that there will be some give and take, and priorities will have to be established depending upon the particular project, the particular sites. Because a little property on High Street is going to be a lot different than that Webb Mill building on the river, right? Yeah. And so, that's one of the challenges I think that we have all acknowledged for a long time in doing guidelines that kind of tries to anticipate all of it, right? So that would be one of my sort of overall comments. And I even think anytime you put in a dimension, like you said, like pedestrian entrances every 50 feet. Well, again, that might be good on High Street, on Adam Street, but is it good on High? You know, where your parcels are smaller and so forth. And so, you know, whether you want to give a dimension or not, you know, is and that's just one of the ones I circled. I think there's some others that I've circled, but you know, I throw a few things out there for you to think about, like that. And I also there's sorry, I thought it was something, but I'll have to go back through. I had a few more particular things that I circled. So how do we want to get those comments to you? Because normally we want everybody to hear each other's comments. So if we send them separately, I guess through Tim can share them with the other board members, but we wouldn't have had a chance to discuss them. So, you know, like Sean said, he has things. I'm sure everyone will have things they want to comment on. So maybe what we could do is send it through Tim. Then Peter and Dylan, you can compile a list so that at our next meeting, we at least have, in advance of our next meeting, at least we will see what everybody else wants to talk about, even if we haven't yet talked about it. So that we can get as much done as possible in the meetings that we have before the end of June.
That sounds like a good plan. So your proposal was that you all will send comments to Tim. Tim will send them to us and we'll compile them.
And then you'll redistribute them back out to us as a compiled list.
I can compile the comments. That's not a problem.
Okay.
These guys can do the real work. I'll do the other stuff.
Thanks, Tim.
Tim, can I get clear on which document we're commenting on? Dylan, the one you just went through is not the one that I saw in Tim's email from earlier this week. Is it, am I confused, Tim?
So we sent out two documents. One was sort of the background information of the existing conditions analysis that led up to the design guidelines. I don't think you need to comment on that. That's basically like an interim product for us. And the other one was the 40 pages of design guidelines, and that's what you'd be commenting on.
And then Dylan, you'll send along to me the presentation that you gave tonight as kind of a supplement to.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So Sean, so the guidelines are the big thing. I think this presentation can be a good kind of way to kind of digest, you know, some of that stuff.
Okay.
And I can I can pull out the questions that were in the presentation for you, so you don't have to hunt through the presentation for them.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you.
And I want to go back to what Cheryl said about dimensions. So we did include some dimensions in there. You know, we include them in some ways. It's like floating a balloon. Like, do you want dimensions in there or do you not want them? They have pros and cons. Pro is it's really clear. You can say, no, we said 50 feet and not have a conversation about whether there are enough entrances on the front facade of a building, right? Because you already know what you want. But on the other hand, it makes something more rigorous than maybe it needs to be and doesn't fit various contexts as well as, it doesn't give as much flexibility, even though all of these are advisory anyway. So
yeah, one thing I'm just going to throw out for the fellow members to think about too is that, you know, while we have a streetscape that requires commercial space, right, at the street. But, you know, if you wanted to have a residential entrance that was set back a little bit, that had a little forecourt, you know, maybe a little fountain, a tree, something like that, you know, that could be very attractive, right? And it kind of gives a little outdoor privacy to the residential entrance before you get in. So this is where having the dimensional and having every entrance be at the face of the building maybe too prescriptive. Anyway, that's just some of my thinking.
Yep.
I'm doing a project right now on Blue Hill Ave in Mattapan, and we've been asked by the community to preserve an existing tree, and that is actually becoming the forecourt to the residential entrance. So I have something top of mind that made me think of it. But there's, but I'm sure there's other examples in other places.
Right. Yeah, one thing I was wondering about the zoning that's related to that is, so it says that 50% of the, or whatever the percentage is, has to be commercial. But I don't think I saw anything in there about whether parking was allowed along the front facade of the building. So in the remainder of the space, does it have to be residential on the ground floor or lobby, or what's allowed to be on the ground floor of the building besides the commercial that's required?
Yeah, I think when that was what was contemplated is that topographic change. So if you had a parcel that was front to back from Adams to High, you've got 20 feet, in some places at least 20 feet of grade level change. So the parking's buried in the back. So when it's facing High Street. So you're coming in on Adams Street with a commercial use, you can park behind it, it's buried. So that was kind of the contemplation there. But if, let's just say you're up on High and you're facing the other side where you have Milton Hill House, I think is the abutter, or maybe some residential homes up there. And you don't have that same topographic change. So what you do with that other 50%, I suppose, could be parking, could be residential.
All right. Yeah, so I mean, that goes back to the need to think through the parking a little more and just make sure
Just
you have what you want.
maybe a time check. It's 10 p.m. or 4 a.m. depending on where you are in the world.
Are you somewhere where it's 4 a.m.?
Yeah, where
John is.
John's in Italy.
John,
Oh my God.
the Limoncello soon.
I know.
The sun comes up.
Well,
Wow.
this has been wonderful. I think this has been great, exciting, and a lot to think about. So
yeah, folks, if you can get me your comments and notes that I can pass along to Peter and Dylan, towards the end of next week, middle of next week would be greater. But that would be good, and then we can kind of reconvene here on the 26th. And I think also, just before we go, did we want to talk about a sort of a final public forum to present the final guidelines? What do we think a timeline like that would look like? I guess, Dylan, I'm asking you in terms of, if, presuming that you get enough feedback that you need from the board between tonight and the 26th, when do we think we would be ready to do a kind of final presentation to, the public to get, that last bit of input?
I think mid-June. Probably gonna be it might be the third week of June.
because we meet June 2nd, and then
we got town meeting in the
middle. Right, town meeting. But Rich is away the week of the 20th, though, right?
Yeah.
But we have two meetings to talk about these, like the 26th and the 2nd.
Yep.
So is the idea that this is a presentation just to present the final, or Tim, or is this intended to be some kind of opportunity for feedback?
I think we definitely need to have feedback from the residents, the different commissions, different people who are interested. Shade Tree Committee, I love as much community input as possible. So.
When's town meeting?
What are our new dates?
6th, 7th, 9th, 13th, 14th. I hope that's it.
I mean, we're gonna have to figure out what type of community involvement in board hearing that you're gonna want to see, because that kind of doesn't go together. Like the fact that it's less than a month away, and we want to, if folks want to have all of that input, the two don't go together. So just pointing that out.
Well,
One thing,
outreach. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Cheryl.
yeah, I just want to say that a lot of this language is very technical. And so, I think we would want to be strategic about what kind of input you'd want to receive. Like, are we asking for feedback on whether, the depth is appropriate or the number of entrances are appropriate? I think we're not. I think what we need to get feedback on, have we covered the subjects, the high level, because otherwise it will be very difficult to get this done. And we know what is required of our work on the planning board. And so we know what we need, like this is a guide for us and for developers. So anyway, that's my suggestion, because to explain it all in a public forum, this level of detail, and expect to have meaningful input in one couple hour session, I think is asking too much.
Yeah, I think something like the outline that Dylan presented tonight, sort of that level of detail or less, plus a lot of
I'd say less.
with a lot of illustrations. So that
So I do know that there's, a homeowner who, lives in the single family house, the only single family house right in Milton Village. And he is an architect. Really be. Meredith, in your
Yes.
neighborhood. So maybe it's reaching out to key people to have them look at the technical part of it. And then, and it's probably a lot too technical for myself too, but I'm great at visualizing. I've got great visualization skills, and I just, having what at the forum that you did a little while ago, that was really helpful. And maybe having some of those diagrams or visuals saying, especially with the garages. And I agree, the 50-foot in between doorways. I don't know, that seems, every business is a little bit different, and everybody wants kind of a little bit different sign. And so I do think providing a little bit more flexibility is key too. But I do think there are some really key residents in key spots who probably want to have some input.
One thing I would say is, if you're going to do outreach to particular property owners, I think you need to do outreach to all in the district, because this came up before. Most of these are business owners, and we often speak of residents, but business property owners pay taxes too. And as Joe Parlavecchio, chamber president, reminded, I've forgotten which meeting I was at recently where he reminded folks of that. But anyway, there are actually, the number of property owners in the district is pretty small, if you think about it. So that's my caution, Maggie, and when, being selective about reaching out to folks, I caution against.
I like the idea. I mean, so these are guidelines, and we're doing this with the intention of making sure we guide folks, right, that want to do projects. So you don't have to follow every single thing in here. That's not what this is about, right? And so I think if done right, and you're giving a presentation on what the goal of this was, and what we heard from the public, and what we're trying to, make happen here. If somebody comes in and give them, suggestions, and then you walk through it, because I think Cheryl, not speak for you, but I think maybe what you're thinking is like somebody might look at some of these technical things and then go into go down a rabbit hole of one of them when technically it's not a standard, so they don't have to do it, but we're trying to guide the process. I don't know. So, I mean, as long as we do it the appropriate way, like I wouldn't want to send these out and say, what are your thoughts on every one of these? Because that doesn't even make sense because these aren't like the law. This is, we're trying to get to an end. And so I think some context has to be provided with it of, you know, kind of like what those pictures were showing. This is what the look and feel could look like if you do this. This is what the look and feel if you could do this. And I think that'll give folks a good indication of why we're doing what we're doing. So I do think, I agree. It makes a lot of sense to get feedback from people, but there's got to be a lot of context with this.
Tim, are these drafts, are they on the website now for people to look at?
We haven't put them up, but we can.
I think that's always great. Just, and say this is a draft only, but have those on the website for people who want to just read through. Would be great.
Right. So Tim, I think you and I should connect about dates because it sounds like the town meeting makes things fairly complicated.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. I think we'll have to back into something and then kind of figure out our kind of approach from there. Just because the calendar is a constraint, but we'll figure it out.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, Dylan.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Good night.
Bye.
Good to see you.
Yep.
Bye. Thank you.
See ya.
All right. So real quickly, if we want to hit 131, does everybody have just a few minutes just to try to? Did everyone, I don't know, get to see the minor amendment? The decision? If not, we can move this to the 26th. This is regarding the parking at 131 Elliott Street.
Yeah, so Meredith, can I just throw out there that, you know, since we didn't hold a public hearing, you know, we have to decide whether we think that this requires that and requires the amendment. I kind of drafted that as if it was that, just to kind of, you know, put the background into it and then what we would do. So I don't think it would be any different. I just am thinking that process, well, the decision wouldn't be any different, or the resolution, the final outcome wouldn't be any different, except that it would actually be a recorded amendment, right? So that it's in the record. So
similar to what we just did for Walcott Woods.
Yeah, similar to that. I mean,
yeah, that would be fine. And this also would need to be reflected in the condo docs. Was the other thing that I was looking at the condo docs, and it would need to be updated with the times and.
Okay, so then we would need to add that
language. That needs to be put into the condo docs.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, we would need to add that language that the condo docs would need to be updated per that. I mean, we would need to add that to what I wrote. Yeah.
Right. Has everyone had a chance to read through this, or would you like a little more time?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure. The email that Tim sent on Monday, right? There's 2 documents in there.
It's in the folder, Sean, that he sent.
It is.
Yeah.
All right.
He sent a link to the folder.
Yeah. Why don't we move this, the motion to amend to the 26th then, and let Sean have a chance to make sure he can take a look? Is that okay, Tim? And then.
Well, I guess the question is, are we still talking about this being a minor amendment, or are we talking about it being an amendment that's going to require a public hearing?
Being a minor amendment.
So is there such a mechanism in the permit though?
Yes. If it's a substantial amendment, then you need to have a public hearing. And if it's not, you can decide to make a non-substantial amendment.
And that was separate from what is allowed of the building commissioner to do? That was a separate provision? I didn't
Yes.
see that, okay. So that's fine. So Tim, can you though, put in the folder all of the amendments? You know, like you gave us the original permit, but not the 2 or 3 amendments that came after it.
Were there 2 or 3 amendments? I thought there was only 1.
No, there's only 1 that's recorded, but there were more. I believe.
All right, well, you're gonna have to walk me through that because if there's only
Okay.
1 that's recorded, then there's only 1 amendment.
That's my point. How do you keep track of these things later? Like, how do we go back later and say, yeah, this is what we agreed to, other than it's in the minutes somewhere? You know, so that was my question about how do we track these amendments if they're not recorded? Because they came before us more than once. I'll go back to I'll have to do some digging because it was a couple of years ago, 2 years ago at least for one of them, and longer ago than that for the other, at least one other.
Yeah, and you know, your whatever decision you make, you know, because again, there'll be a written kind of component to it. You'll have a written decision, and you could require that it be recorded. You know, it's something that seems like it should go without saying, but I kind of feel like it should always be said. You know, whether it's a minor amendment or not, it should be recorded so that it's got a kind of chain of custody, you know, at the registry.
Well, you know, it's important when things come up later, and I'll just like mention like 333 Brush Hill Road that, you know, issues came up later and nobody on the board was, you know, they were on the original board that approved the first time around. So you have to be able to get a hold of all of the permits, you know, so that the people making the decisions afterwards have all the information. And if it's not recorded, then you're relying on the records at town hall, right?
Correct.
Okay, so we should definitely move this to the 26th. And maybe Tim, just send us, you know, if you could maybe just send out an email just confirming what our proper procedure is as far as your understanding.
And I guess who determines what a minor amendment is?
We do,
Oh,
unless it's explicit in the decision.
So do you, so just so I have this straight, and I'll communicate this to Steve Connolly. Depending on the decision that you make on so there's going to have to be changes to the condo documents.
Yes.
So the condo documents that you have don't reflect.
Correct. They would be incorrect. They would be inconsistent with what we're amending and we're approving as the spaces and particularly the times, the parking. I think it's like 6 to 9. It's
Okay.
It's inconsistent.
So that's reflected in the language that Cheryl provided. So if I were to tell Steve, go ahead and update these. So, and you know, obviously the board's gonna have to make its own decision and everything, but at least to get a head start on getting those condo docs updated. So that everything, because that's gonna be, you'll want to do both of those at the next meeting, if it's possible to approve both of those.
Yeah, and it's right in the parking section. Okay. Are we good on that? All right, so then just the other thing, but I don't know if everyone has had a chance again to look at this, but the A. Thomas, the decision that we authorized Tim to approve. I looked through it and Tim, it looks fine to me, but I don't know if everyone else has had a chance to look through that.
So Meredith, is that only those of us who were present on the board for the hearing? So that would be you, Rich, and I?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I read it. I'm fine with it.
Same here.
Okay.
So if you want to just take a quick vote, I mean, I don't know if it's actually 100% necessary. I asked Marion to draft the decision because I wasn't present for the hearing. So I just want to make sure you had a chance to get your eyes on it. You've already voted to allow me to execute it, so we should be all set. So
I mean, if you need a vote, I'll move to authorize the Director of Planning and Community Development to execute the decision as presented to us for this meeting.
Rich, a second. Okay, great. All right, all in favor?
I just got a message from Steve Connolly that he's present with the phone number. So if you want to allow him to speak, go back to that agenda item.
Oh, sure.
Steve, you're in.
I'm sorry, but we needed to finish the vote. I'm
Can we
sorry.
finish? Yeah. Well, let's just take a quick vote. We have a second on the table. All in favor? Cheryl?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Thank you, Steve. You're in? I think you might be muted.
Tim, do you need to unmute him?
Steve, I think, is it *6? I always forget the phone rules. It's either *6 or *9. One of them is to raise hand, one of them is to unmute.
What will this, I mean, we're still going to have to push this off, aren't we?
Yeah, I don't think we can take a vote tonight.
So maybe, we don't have a chat function, do we? He can't put something into a chat.
No.
All right, let me see. I have a message from him. He's asking if he can get a vote on the parking.
Can we put up the language that you wrote, Cheryl?
Yeah.
Let me open it. Let me find my file. Okay, I've got the file open.
Sean, you're amazing. I can't believe you are staying awake.
I can't either.
I know.
How many cups of espresso are we on?
I know.
You know, Tim, it's dangerous. If you do that,
Right.
then you'll never fall asleep.
Yeah, it sneaks up on you.
All right, let me just find it, guys.
I should go for the limoncello and go to bed.
Rich, that's an excellent idea. I think that's great advice.
All right, can you see now?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, good.
Thank you.
All right, so this is just background at the top. What the sorry.
That's what the current.
Tim, you need to activate the *6 function. I'm getting the message. So this sets out what's required of the zoning, what's in the special permit, what the request is, and then what we agreed to. And so last time we agreed to this in concept. I put this in writing.
Hello.
I think. Hey, there's Steve.
Steve, we can hear you, yeah.
You're killing me, Tim.
It's a good thing you have my phone number, Steve.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And speed dial.
the only one I got, so that's it. So yeah, I was wondering with the I see it now. You're going through the language. That'd be great if we could at least get a vote on that. The condo docs I can adjust. If you agree to this, I can adjust the 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock for the interior spaces on the condo docs.
Mhm.
I know you need to review them anyway, so.
So I
Hello?
think, so Steve, I believe Tim shared this with you, right?
Yes.
And this reflects your understanding of what we discussed at the last meeting.
Yes, it does.
Okay. So did everyone get a chance to review it?
Yeah, Cheryl, thanks for putting that up. I think what you wrote for the decision on this document is it's consistent with what, you know, I was comfortable with and what we discussed when we were together the last time. I'm okay with it.
And well,
So Steve, you're looking for this so that you can proceed with completing the work. That's right.
Yes, right. Yeah. Then we could look at the condo docs at the next, what was it, the 26th, you said? That'd be fine.
Rich, did you say you were good?
yep.
Maggie?
Yes.
And I'm good with it. Yeah.
Do we want to add language requiring that the decision be recorded?
I think so. Yes, I would say, right? If it's an
So
amendment.
we can have a motion just subject to the addition of that requirement, which I can add, pull it from one of the prior decisions.
We'll dig out the other decision and make sure everything is recorded. I thought there was one other one that I thought was recorded already, and I'll make sure everything is up to date.
Yeah, so Steve, am I correct? There has been more than one amendment, correct?
I think we did one with the height a long time, and then the most recent one was starting the screening on the upper roof.
I think you also had lost a parking space on the interior due to a stair
Yeah, because
location.
we lost one because of the stairs,
Yeah.
so that should be,
Yeah.
and if that's not recorded, we'll get it recorded, because I know that was in writing, and it went to the town clerk's office for the 20-day period as well.
Okay. Or Tim, if you want to add that language, however you want to do it, but I think
Yeah,
we can.
I can throw something in at the end.
Okay. All right, so then I'll make a motion.
And then do you
to-
also, oh, sorry, Cheryl, do you want to also authorize me to sign it?
Sure. All right, so the motion will be that the planning board will amend the special permit for 131 Elliott Street as indicated in the decision before us tonight, with a revision to be added by the Director of Planning and Community Development, requiring this decision to be recorded at the Registry of Deeds.
And reflected in the condo docs. Inappropriately.
Okay.
Which
And
I think it is, Meredith. I think it is, other than the 8 to 8 for the inside one. I think
Right,
the rest
but
of it
just-
we,
Just to make sure they're consistent.
And that we authorize the Director of Planning and Community Development to sign this decision on behalf of the Planning Board.
I would second. All right. Roll call. Maggie,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Rich,
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes.
and myself, yes.
We're done.
And I think that's good for tonight. That's
Motion to
10:26.
adjourn.
Have a good evening, Sean.
And motion
I think
to
it's good.
adjourn? Yes.
Good
John, would you like to
morning,
make a
Cheryl.
motion? Yeah. Would you
I
like to
would
make
like
a
to make a
motion
motion.
to
I
adjourn?
would like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting. Yes.
Is
Yeah.
there a second?
Second.
Yes.
Okay, roll call. All in favor, Cheryl,
Yes.
Maggie,
Yes.
Rich,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
and myself, yes. Thank you.
Good
Night, everyone.
Yeah.
Good night.
Nice to see you guys. All right. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.